Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Wisconsin School Garden Network webinar series on building a successful food forest. This webinar is being supported by multiple organizations around Wisconsin. We have Grow Crosse, the Crosse Area Family YMCA, and the Coulee Region Ecoscapes LLC. We'll be recording this webinar today to be available for future use. If you want to go ahead and share it with your colleagues or coworkers, we'll be making sure to email out a copy to all of you. We will be answering questions at the end of the webinar. If you want to use your chat feature on the control panel, just be sure to enter your questions there and we'll get to them at the end. A little bit about the Wisconsin School Garden Network. We were founded in April of 2016. The Wisconsin School Garden Network is a network of schools, early care education centers, along with after-school, school and school garden support organizations. We are at the state and local and regional level. Together, we work to grow school gardens and school garden-based education movement for the health of all children. My name is Stephanie, and I'm the Training and Outreach Specialist for the Wisconsin School Garden Network. It's my job to help our gardens and communities find different resources. I help lead and facilitate workshops and webinars and help to connect different community members. We do have a website that has many wonderful resources on it for different educators as well as teachers. But if you have any questions and want to learn more, my email will be available at the end of the presentation. The Wisconsin School Garden Network is supported by the Environmental Design Lab along with Community Groundworks, and as I mentioned, many other statewide, regional, and local partners. Funding is provided by the Wisconsin Partnership Program through the University of Wisconsin School of Medicine and Public Health. And now kind of kick off the official webinar, I will introduce our presenters and hand it over to Jamie at Grow Crosse.
Great, thank you. I am also part of the leadership circle that helped form the food forest. So that's why I'm at the table today.
Next slide. And my name is Jill Miller, and I want to welcome all of you. I'm the coordinator for the Y in community engagement. I just changed my title, so I'm not quite used to saying who I am now, but I work for the Y and involved with the food forest.
Hi there, I'm Judson Steinback, and I am one of the owners of Coulee Region Ecoscapes LLC. We're a sustainable landscaping business in the area, and we have also been part of the leadership group of the food forest here at the YMCA. And I also happen to be a board member of Grow Crosse. Next. So imagine just for a minute that you came to the YMCA and you got a little workout in sometime in the middle of the summer, and it's kind of hot outside, and you amble out of the Y and you notice that there is a different kind of a garden growing right by the road. And so this sort of catches your eye because it doesn't look like gardens usually look on the outside of a building. So you wander over towards it and you notice that there are a number of fruit trees in this space. And so you kind of walk towards these fruit trees and you see some small pears forming and some plums ready to harvest. And then you look out towards the street and you see this really, really long planting of prairie plants that is just buzzing with pollinator insects like butterflies and bumblebees and other kinds of bugs that you know are supposed to be good for the earth. And so you get pulled in further and you see that there's a big blueberry patch with perhaps strawberries crawling all around the base of it. And there's raspberries that are just tempting you to eat them, and so you just eat them because they're there. And then you notice that there are some other kinds of plants which you don't recognize, and you leave them alone and think to yourself that you'll have to find out what those are. And for that moment, you're kind of escaping the fact that you're next to a busy road in an urban setting, and you go back to your car and go back to work or your family, and your day goes on. So this is essentially the food forest space that we've created. Next. So a food forest, the main question that we get is, well, what's a food forest? And a food forest is a sustainable gardening system that imitates a woodland ecosystem. A woodland ecosystem is defined as having about 60% light penetration through the canopy. So it's not imitating like a very dense forest. It's imitating a system that has some light penetration and some areas of shade. And so things that you would see in a woodland ecosystem typically would be things like oak trees or hickories or perhaps other tree species, a multitude of shrubs, grasses, flowers, sedges, things like that. And so what we're doing here is we're replacing some of those types of plants with things that are edible, medicinal, or perhaps add some kind of value to the ecosystem of the garden, like attracting pollinators or adding soil fertility. That's essentially what a food forest is. Next. So food forests are important for a whole host of reasons. And these include, but are certainly not limited to, helping to eliminate food insecurity, helping to diminish the number of food deserts in an urban area, although they certainly don't need to take place in an urban area. Ecologically, they offer really innumerable benefits by adding plants that offer benefits to pollinators, that offer benefits to improve soil health, that cool the environment by reducing the amount of concrete in an urban area or other place. One of the really incredible benefits of a food forest is that it brings people together in community. And so that's what this neighborhood revitalization piece refers to, is that once these places are constructed and functioning, people are drawn in, and all kinds of people will work together to help the food, raise the food, and then, typically speaking, give the food away, or have harvest festivals or classes that take place in the food forest. So it really can help to bring neighborhoods together. And of course, these offer a number of health benefits, like having people engage in more kinds of physical activity, exposing people to the natural world. And many of the plants that are planted in a food forest also help to filter out toxins that enter the environment, reduces the amount of stormwater runoff that carries pollutants off to local watersheds. So these are some, but certainly not all of the reasons that they're important. Next. So some basic terminology that we'll go through pretty quickly here, and if there are questions about these terms, we can address them at the end for when there's time allotted for that. Permaculture, to define it in its simplest way, perma referring to sustainable or permanent, and culture referring to way of life. And so it's essentially a sustainable way of life. And out of permaculture arises a number of different strategies to live sustainably. One of those, at an agricultural level, is the food forest. There are also building strategies and other aspects of permaculture that we won't really get into deeply here. Organic is a certification process regulated by the federal government, and broadly speaking, organic foods aim to do many of the things that are the goals and objectives of permaculture, and that is to reduce things like chemicals in the food system, to use more natural means of growing food, to have healthier food. But organic refers to a kind of regulatory designation. by the Department of Agriculture. So go on. So sustainability is essentially doing things in a way that provides a long-term functionality. So doing something unsustainably would mean that a resource or a product is created in a way that it will eventually just run out or cause irreparable harm to the system. And doing things sustainably means that the system is able to perpetuate itself without tremendous amounts of input. Typically speaking, sustainability also refers to long-term ecological health as well, as particularly in the context of gardening. So guilds are essentially communities of plants, and in a food forest, a guild is a really important concept, so that when you design food forest spaces, you are designing in particular plant species that grow well with other plant species. The example that I've used already is the idea of blueberries and strawberries. So strawberries have root systems that cover just the top layer of the soil, and blueberries will penetrate a little bit deeper into the soil. And in that regard, you'll have plants that are sharing resources rather than competing for resources. And this can really increase productivity and sustainability in a garden system. So invasive species is a little bit of a controversial term more and more now, but invasive species are ones that are not native to a particular area and also have an incredibly aggressive habit, so that usually they take over an ecosystem at the expense of all other plant species or many other plant species in that area. Common examples of these would be things like buckthorn trees, which take over forest lands, reed canary grass, which take over sort of bottom lands like in the Mississippi River Valley, and are very, very difficult to eradicate. And then to wrap it up, a native species is one that has existed in a particular area for thousands of years, and most importantly, developed beneficial co-evolutionary relationships with other organisms. And that's why native plants are pushed so hard by people who are in the sustainable gardening movement, because when you put a native plant into a garden, not only are you putting a plant in there, which is helping in many different ways, but you're also benefiting many other creatures. The most common example that many people know of is the milkweed plant, which has co-evolved over thousands of years with the monarch butterfly. Next.
So this is Jill, and what we're going to do with the webinar is we broke it up into 3 different buckets. And so I'm going to cover part of the first bucket, but this is our transitional slide that's is to introduce you what we're going to talk about. So you can go to the next slide. So when you create a food forest, you know, at some level, you know, from having conversations with many people about how to replicate a food forest, I think the thing to remember is a food forest can be something very small, it can be very large. But the most important part to me regarding the food forest is similar to the analogy of healthy soil. We all know, working in this field, that you need healthy soil in order to have beautiful plants. And so I parallel that analogy to the soil of the community. And to create beautiful community, you need to have beautiful partnerships. And so when you're creating a food forest, you kind of look around your community at those people that have expressed an interest for one of the variety of reasons that Judd had talked about before. And you ask those people to come around the table for conversation. And, you know, you talk about, hey, if we were to do this, you know, what's our vision? What's the need in the community? I had gotten a call from the YMCA in Fond du Lac, and they have a parking lot for a church that has been closed down across the street from the Y. And they want to change that space into some sort of a food forest. So they have a need to replicate space. So basically, just these are kind of the things to remember about, you know, who wants the food forest? How is it going to connect the community? How is it going to connect the neighborhood? And as far as organizing volunteers, it's really not even something you have to organize because it comes so organically. Once you bring people together that have like an interest and you bring them around the table, you organically develop your volunteers and your community support. Next slide, please. So the other question is okay, how much is this going to cost us? And we had a discussion among the La Crosse team here earlier in the week, and really to do a food forest in a sustainable way, I think the minimum that a budget needs to be or should be is about $1,000. You know, that's going to get you, that's going to buy you the beginning of a food forest. Our food forest here for a 2-year budget, it was $50,000. And that was because we needed to do some structural things with where our food forest was. So we needed to build a wall so our food forest wouldn't fall into West Avenue. But I would say that's unique to our food forest. And that was a chunk of that budget for the first year. But when you're creating a budget, I would really recommend you to look at it in a 2-year cycle, because you really need a good 2 years in order to get your feet on the ground. And, you know, I am not going to, you know, kind of try to tell you that it can be a little challenging sometimes, because we were, I think, in our community ahead of our time. So when we went to funding sources and we asked for sponsorships and partnerships and fundraising, basically when we went to go date our donors, you know, they were kind of like, well, we really don't have any emotional connection to the food forest. And you haven't really shown what you're going to do, what kind of outcomes you're going to provide. So I think those that are really looking at funding the food forest now are so ahead of where we were 5 years ago, because we have created stories that new funding sources did not know before. Next slide.
So the one thing that I would like to point out in terms of site selection is that whatever site you have, you can put a food forest there. Certainly some sites are going to be better than others, but any site that you have access to, there will be plants that will be able to be grown there, and they will be able to offer ecological, medicinal, edible benefits to your community. That said, there are a number of things to look at when selecting a site. And one of those, of course, is local regulations. Are there building permits required? Are there setbacks from the roadway? Those kinds of things. So are there adjacent property owners that you might have issues with? Those are preliminary kinds of questions that need to be undertaken when selecting a site. Then, perhaps most importantly, when you're trying to grow food, medicine, fiber, you need to consider what is the environment in which you're growing these things. So there are some major factors, and one of those is the solar conditions. Typically speaking, in our hemisphere, on the north side of a space, there's less sun. And on the south side of a space, there's more sun. And so different plants are adapted to those kinds of conditions. At our food forest at the YMCA, it's really neat because ours runs from north to south. And so we actually have designed in a kind of transitional ecosystem where we have more shade plants on the northern end and more sun-loving plants on the southern end. Another major factor is the soil type, its ability to hold water. Certain plants grow well in clay and not sandy type soils. Others will grow in virtually anything. And so when you look at the design, you have to really do a good soil analysis. The University of Wisconsin Extension can provide you with some really nice, inexpensive soil assessments too if you send some samples to their lab. And of course, you also have to look at the availability of water and the drainage patterns of the site. Where's the water going? Are you able to harvest water from the building, say like from a downspout? Or in the case of the YMCA, we weren't. Do you need to design in ways to capture water like we've done here? If the soil is sandy, then the water will percolate through more. If it's heavier type clayey soil, it will soak in and hold more. So those are other site considerations when designing the space. And also you want to consider access and safety and how people are going to move about the space. Do you want to have areas where people will sit or play, or like at our space, we have a couple of little nests that we've designed to encourage people to sit and read stories with a caregiver. And so all of these fit into the broad category of site selection and design. Next.
All right, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the education in the food forest. If you want to go ahead and move on to the next slide. Before I explain the educational programs, we just wanted to talk about the wide range of people that have been involved and are drawn to the food forest. Even just trying to get the people on board here at the leadership at the YMCA. The CEO 5 years ago wouldn't have known what yarrow or what elderberries were, but now seeing what an asset this space is, again, drawing in such a diverse crowd, he now considers this one of the top projects that the YMCA has been involved in. And that's because we've seen everything from a 3-month-old up to elderly people come and learn something and have hands-on experiences in the food forest. Also, socioeconomically, people who maybe are very well off, they come partly probably for community, but also learning about something that they might want to do in their own backyard, something they might want to do at a business they own. We also have people at the other end who may not be economically well off, who are just amazed by the abundance that the food forest offers. Like Judson was talking about, the abundance of raspberries. A lot of them are very excited and even wanting to take some things home that they've maybe tried for the first time or just maybe not had as much exposure to in the past. This has been really great because it really intertwines with the inclusiveness that the Y, or one of the values, I should say, that the Y has. And then last but not least, intergenerational has also been a key to the education. So we've had people, let's say from the Master Gardeners or from the Live Strong program here at the Y, who've worked hand in hand with youth, with the teens, sometimes teen moms, at some of the educational things that I'll talk about in a minute. So it's really just been amazing at the huge diversity that we've seen and people getting involved. And it's really not just one group of people that are into gardening or people that are into healthy food. It's really connected a really wide range of people to the Y and to each other. So a lot of the educational programs that we have, one of the neatest is the Wednesday night work nights, and this runs throughout the summer. So most Wednesdays from June to August. We have community nights where a lot of times a group signs on. So maybe it's a group from a local bank or it's a Boy Scout group. A group signs on to take that night, but then also community members and members from our Food Forest Board are all invited. Anybody's invited. And they come, and just to paint a picture, we typically start these nights out with a little bit of yoga. We have some snacks. We have a band playing. And then there's some education about what we're going to do that night. So when we were first building the food forest, one of the nights showed how to make the weed barriers. Tell me if that's language. So we actually laid down cardboard and then soil and then wood chips to make sure that, you know, the existing weeds would not grow through. And then we paired adults with youth, and they helped lay this down and learned how to do the sheet mulching, which just laid the basis for the food forest. So those community nights really help us do things. Now that it's very established, there's a lot of harvesting, weeding, different things like that. But those Wednesday night work nights are a really fun way for people to connect and learn about the food forest. We also have kids activities during that time. So this year we had a volunteer who led things like scavenger hunts. One really fun one was also they measured the length of roots and tried to see who could find the longest root for things that we were pulling, you know, like weeds and things like that that we were pulling or food that we were picking. So really trying to engage the kids and encouraging families then to bring their children with them when they come to these days. We also have learn and grow days, and these are sometimes field trips or days, you know, typically during the day when people come and learn things about the food forest. We did have a group of teen moms come out and do one of the learn and grow days, a new moves program from the Y. So a lot of different groups able to connect with the learn and grow days. We've held some weekend workshops. These have been really neat. They are available to the whole community, and things like herbal remedies, for instance, will teach how to use some of the herbs that are grown in the food forest. So for instance, I had been wanting to learn how to make elderberry syrup for probably 3 years. I'd read all about it. I just didn't actually understand which were elderberries and how to prepare it. They taught this class, and now I actually just made it again this week. So though people are able to know how to use the herbs that are grown in the food forest and use them in different ways. We also have done some preservation and Food Forest 101, and those Food Forest 101 classes at the beginning have taught a lot of the basics, but then also we're a part of designing the food forest. And now a lot of those classes, people can, at the end of the class, kind of design their own guild and maybe something that they would put in their own yard. So yeah, learning what is a guild, why does it matter, and different things about the plants that are in the food forest. So those have been really cool community resources for people hoping to dive in and understand the food forest even more. And then lastly, we've had a ton of different interest groups come and check out the food forest. We've had a lot of representatives from YMCAs all over the state who've come through during a training. We've had master gardeners, university students, so just a ton of groups wanting to learn more. And again, going back to the CEO, I think this is why he is so excited about this project, because it really draws so many people in and touches them at a personal level when they're able to pick some fresh food, experience something for the first time. So it's really been a great way to bring people in. And then looking at these numbers, this is from this past year, and sometimes it's really hard just looking at a number to really understand the impact that those numbers mean. I know Judson was saying, so one of the visits to the food forest, if you can imagine him going on a mountain bike ride and then swinging through the food forest and picking some fruit fresh off of the tree before going home. If you can imagine my little daughter learning what a chokecherry is, or chokeberry, am I saying that right?
Chokeberry.
Chokeberry. They're very tart and very They're called chokeberries for a reason. She loved them, and when we left, you see that girl with mud on her hands. My daughter actually had stained purple and blue hands from all the berries that she had ate. So again, you look at those numbers, and sometimes it's hard to really picture what each visit actually meant, but each person is coming and tasting, trying, learning, growing from these visits. So it was an amazing year in the food forest. And that food harvested, again, hard to tell by that number, but when people come through, they're both working, but they're also able to try a lot of new things and tasting it right fresh from the food forest, which both is the most healthy time to eat it, right when it's picked, but also just amazing in terms of how much more local food is brought to this area.
So our third bucket to leave you with today or this afternoon is the future direction of the community food forest at the Y. And so we just have a lot of excitement and hope about the direction we're going. So I think we'll start with this slide here.
So one of our goals is that there's about 3,000 square feet of mostly grass. You can see there's a couple nice oak trees in that picture, but predominantly it's a grassy area that is connected to the current food forest and then connects over to the parking lot, at least the walkway next to the parking lot. And we're hoping to, well, our goal I think is in 2019 to expand the food forest all the way to the parking lot and cover that remaining 3,000 square feet of grass. And so currently we're working on the design and working with potential funders to make that happen. Next.
So the other area that we are focusing on our future direction, and I wish we would be able to show you an online video, but we are going to send it to you. And my apologies for that. We weren't 100%. It wasn't 100% shovel ready to show you, and so we will definitely get that to you. But it's been a beautiful video that really tells the story of the food forest, and we have a lot of ideas on what we want to do to leverage that video to share our story more intimately. But the other kinds of things that we have in store is a lot of different educational presentations, and I just was at the Turbo last week, and the topic was on hunger. And we talked about the traditional ways that we deal with hunger in our communities, and then how the food forest offers a little different twist to hunger, and that's through the arts and humanities. And it was just really exciting to have this generation of students really have the opportunity to think about hunger through arts and humanities, and how the food forest gets you such out of your box of dropping off a can of food at our food pantry, which is great. Those are great foundational ways of dealing with hunger. But the food forest, or a food forest, really expands the opportunities. And then we want to do some liaison training. We call it training the trainers. And also we have a lot of hope next June, I believe, of putting together a future conference where we bring people to La Crosse, and we're even thinking about having it be a day and a half. And it's going to be extremely hands-on, and to the point where the people that attend the conference are going to leave with a plan. Next slide. So this is, to me, just a beautiful, I put the slide in there because to me this is one of our guys, our food forest friend, and he has his arms open wide because I think the most exciting part about the food forest is it's so fluid. And we are forever open and inviting all different kinds of partnerships that we never even imagined going into this endeavor 5 years ago. And you know, this is where we lean on you for you know, ideas. Have you thought of this? Have you thought of that? Can we work together? We want to do some on, I guess we'll go to the next slide here before I get ahead of myself. Oh, the next slide is questions. So let me back up. I apologize. Something, we'll just go back a slide or two. Something I didn't talk about is some online training that we want to do too. And right now we're working on seeking out some development grants so we can further develop our food forests across the country and expand our reach. And we want to do that through online training. So, you know, so that slide that I ended on with the boy with his arms open wide, that's our invitation to you and to your circle of influence to, you know, join us in our partnership of building food forests. I think we've all talked about, you know, we'll know our work is done when we have, how many food forests did we say out there? You know,
At least a dozen.
At least a dozen, yeah. And then when we have a dozen in our community, we want to, you know, put a dozen more in other people's communities. But we'll do this all through partnerships. So our next slide is for you. It's questions that you may have for us.
Feel free to use the chat feature on the go-to meetings.
I just briefly got that question here, but Kelly's doing her magic to bring it up more.
It looks like we have a question from Brittany, who says, do you have any food safety concerns, i.e. animals or other things from the food?
So I'm not entirely sure what is meant by animal waste, if they mean like
Composting.
Dogs or other animals wandering in there and leaving waste behind, or I'm not quite sure what is meant by that. In terms of food safety, one of the biggest questions that we're asked is, so this garden is right next to the road. Doesn't that mean that there's going to be all kinds of chemicals and things on the food? So certainly as cars drive by the garden, which they do all day long, every day, they do emit chemicals into the air. The amount of chemicals going into the garden are no different than what would be found just in the rainwater, which is also polluted. Just about everywhere in North America, rainwater is somewhat polluted from industry. And so the food is not being sprayed with any herbicides, pesticides, synthetic fertilizers, actually very few fertilizers of any kind, because after the setup of the garden, where we used a tremendous amount of compost, which was of course aged compost and largely weed free, we just fertilized the garden with the garden material, like the leaves that fall, and we have plants in the garden that create really nutritious leaf mulch for us. So we haven't done any even fertilizing in there. So in that way, relative to food that you would get at the grocery store, which has been sprayed by, or commonly would be sprayed by all manner of chemicals, the food's actually a lot safer to eat out of our food forest than it would, say, if you were eating conventional vegetables. That said, it's still worthwhile to wash any of the food prior to consuming it. But we don't have any concerns about the safety of the food whatsoever.
Another question we have from Brittany is if you have your crops in terms of with inexperienced gardeners picking them, if they aren't ready, or if they pull out a whole plant maybe.
I'd love to answer that one. I'll just back up by saying I have a little bit of a type A personality, and our CEO too was asked about this question when we broke ground, and the question was to him, are you going to put a fence around the food forest, and what will happen if somebody picks something out of the food forest? And his answer was so powerful. It was, well, that would be the best case scenario. We want people to come and pick and harvest. And so, the question of, well, what happens if they pick something that's not ready for harvest? Based on, I think, kind of the shyness of people, we almost have a problem with encouraging people. Go out there and grab some beans. I'll put on Facebook, hey, raspberries are ripe. Go out there and make sure you have some, a handful of raspberries after you work out. Because we almost find that people, are like almost timid about coming. And so we have to really work hard at encouraging people to come and pick and harvest. And I learned this year, what is the worst thing that can happen if somebody picks an apple before it's ready to be picked? And it was absolutely nothing, because the sky did not fall. And I was just like, oh my golly, our apples got picked in July because this young boy who was visiting us from another country had no idea that apples get picked in September. And this got turned around to a teachable moment, because we got to teach him about apples and his mom about apples. And gosh, we all woke up the next day and we were all just fine. I mean, my world did not end. And I have to tell you, I thought it was going to when all my apples got picked off the tree. But there was plenty of apples to be harvested. And so I think it takes a mindset, a paradigm set, or not a set, but a reset and a shift that I think is what makes the food forest so much part of the community.
I think we were also lucky to have someone on our committee who had been involved with food forests on the West Coast. And when this question came up in our committee, she was like, just so you know, once this food forest gets going, you're not going to have a problem of people picking too early. You're going to have a problem of getting enough people out there to pick the stuff that is ready. So she kind of reminded us that, yeah, if a few things get picked early, it's probably okay, because in the grand scheme of things, you're going to have a lot of things that need to be picked. So yeah. You're right, a few here and there that get picked early has not been a big issue.
Wonderful. Looks like we have one more question from Emily. How do you water the food forest?
So there's quite a bit of background noise happening right now, which is a good thing. It's kids playing. Sorry about that. So the first way that we water the food forest is through proper design. So instead of, a lot of times when you think of a way that a landscape is created, it's often created by just having a slope that pitches away from the building and just goes straight to the street. And that way the water will hit the building and hit the ground and then just run into the street and then go down into the storm sewer and run into the river or the lake where it drains. And that's not a sustainable or ecologically beneficial way to design spaces. So what we've done with this food forest is actually to create a series of berms and swales. And a berm is nothing more than a just elevated kind of mound, and a swale is nothing more or less than a little depression. And so what we do is we use these berms to hold back water, to kind of catch it, and then it can settle into the swale and filter down into the ground. And because we already have an existing kind of grade away from the building, the water's moving away from the building, but it's being captured by a series of berms and swales. And this is so effective that even in up to a 6-inch rain event, we're actually capturing all the water that hits the food forest. Anything after 6 inches and it's spilling over, but we've designed it to be able to spill over if needed as well. So good design, smart design will capture water and then require less watering. Another thing about food forests is because they largely consist of perennial plants, that is to say plants that come back year after year, unlike say tomatoes. Their root systems go pretty far down into the soil and can soak up water on a variety of levels in the soil. And so they just require less watering. Now, we do have some areas with some annual vegetables, and when it's really dry for a long time, we do also do some supplemental watering, or if we put some new plants into the forest, we need to baby them for the first couple of seasons. And so we have a few strategies to do that. On our Wednesday night work nights, we water. And we also have the periodic weekend or weekday events. During those times, we usually water. And then we also have a number of people who just really care about the food forest. Jill, myself, other friends of the food forest who, if it seems dry, they'll just stop by the Y because they're probably here with their kids or working out anyways. And there's a hose outside with a key on it, and you can just water. And then we also have a retired maintenance person who, in a very limited time, will come and water the food forest as needed. So that's been our strategy, is to have good design and then a variety of ways to ensure that the food forest is being watered.
So we'll end, Steph, I assume there's no more questions. We have a 1 on our screen under the question icon. So I didn't know if there was one more question out there.
I think we are all good for questions. Unless anybody else has any, feel free to, now is your time.
Yeah, do you want to explain this maybe?
You bet. So what we're going to end on, we have 2 more slides here for you today. This is just a lot of valuable resources that we have found to be very helpful. I'm not going to go through all of them because you'll click on each and every one of them as you have time and interest. But these are resources that we vetted out and feel that saves you a little bit of time from going over tons and tons of different publications. So, feel free to enjoy those. And then the last slide, I believe, is our contact information. There you go. And I think I could speak for, in closing words from Jamie and Judd, but just speaking for myself, one of the things that I enjoy most about my day is when I get questions and the opportunity to talk about the food forest. So I'm the first person on that list. Feel free to email me at any time. Jamie, you want closing words?
Same here.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity. Really appreciate it.
Thank you all so much. This concludes the Wisconsin School Garden Network with Grow Lacrosse and the Lacrosse Area YMCA, along with the Coulee Region Ecoscapes LLC webinar. We thank you so much for coming. And again, like they mentioned, feel free to email any of us with questions.